Imagine moving into your dream home only to discover that the real nightmare is standing right outside your window. Picture this: a faceless man staring at you in the dark, refusing to look away. The next night, masked figures creep into your yard, their whispers turning into sinister laughter as they rattle your doors. The police tell you you're overreacting, but deep down, you know the truth. Now imagine escaping a toxic relationship, thinking you're finally free. Then strangers on the street begin repeating your ex's words. A barista calls you by the pet name only he used. A stranger hums his favorite song. Their eyes lock with yours, cold and unblinking. Different faces, same expression. What would you do if every new face could be his? And then, a family trip meant for joy turns into pure terror. At 3 a.m., the devil's hour, something slams against the garage where you sleep. A figure stands in the shadows, watching. When confronted, he doesn't run, he vanishes into thin air. Welcome to The Price Paid, where true horror stories never let you sleep again. Subscribe now, if you dare. When you finally move into your dream home, you expect peace, comfort, and the quiet relief of having your own safe space. For one young couple, though, the very house they thought would bring them happiness became the backdrop of a psychological and terrifying ordeal that still haunts them to this day. They were only 20 years old, both eager to begin a new chapter together. They had their rescue cat, Bella, with them, boxes still stacked in corners, and that excited glow people carry when starting fresh. At first, everything felt perfect, but one detail disturbed them almost immediately. The house next door looked abandoned. Renovations had started years before but were never finished. The garden gate had been removed, leaving no barrier between the two backyards. An open, yawning space led straight into their property. At first, it was only mildly unsettling. They noticed the house behind the abandoned one was occupied by a group of young men. Sometimes when the couple returned home, they'd see these men cutting through the empty garden, passing right by their windows as if the land was their own. They brush it off, thinking maybe they had permission. But it only took one night for that uneasy feeling to evolve into something much darker. On their very first evening, sitting outside in their new garden beneath the stars, they looked up casually at the houses behind them. That was when they saw him. A man in a darkened room, standing perfectly still at a window, staring down at them. He did not blink. He did not smile. He only stared blankly, as if they were prey caught in his gaze. They tried to dismiss it, perhaps a curious neighbor, but when he remained there for half an hour, watching, their laughter died in their throats. They retreated indoors, uneasy. Days passed. Life seemed normal again. But soon, while they enjoyed another night in their garden, 3 men appeared, entering silently through the gap where the fence should have been. They just stood there, watching. When asked if they were okay, one of them, carrying a large bag with unknown contents, offered stolen dishwasher tablets, as though it were a joke. When the couple declined, he smirked, muttered, "Okay," and walked off with the others. The couple felt violated.
What was that
These
sound?
strangers had walked into their yard as if they owned it, leaving behind an invisible mark of intimidation. It didn't stop there. The men began showing up regularly, wandering through the abandoned property and into the couple's yard. They made no effort to hide their presence, as though they enjoyed the discomfort it caused. The couple wondered if they were being targeted for being young women alone in a new neighborhood. Police occasionally visited the abandoned house, but left without explanation, offering no comfort or answers. Then came the escalation. While the young woman was bathing, a loud bang echoed outside. Her partner rushed out, only to find her girlfriend pointing from the window. A stranger they had never seen before was sprinting across the garden. On the way, he tried their door handle, rattling it as though attempting to break in, before disappearing into the empty property. He began slamming on the windows of the abandoned house, his rage echoing in the night.
Here's what you need to know.
Terrified,
I don't know.
they contacted the police. The officers took a statement, acknowledged the incident, then left. But the unease did not leave with them. Instead, the harassment grew worse. At 2:16 a.m., a shrill whistle cut through the silence. The type of whistle men used to taunt women in the street. Then came a faint tapping on the bedroom window. Cameras were checked, but somehow the footage did not capture the intruder. They stayed awake all night, petrified. The following day was worse. Their Ring doorbell camera had been ripped off, the SD card stolen. Someone had returned deliberately, prepared and bold enough to tamper with their security system. Police suggested they keep doors and windows locked, warning that the removal of the camera could mean something bigger was being planned. Nights blurred into one another, filled with banging on walls, strange noises. and that same mocking whistle. Even the smallest creak in the house felt threatening. They barely slept, living in a state of constant paranoia. Weeks later, as they checked their indoor camera feed, they saw him. A man in a black mask and hood, standing in their garden with arms outstretched like a crucifixion pose. His head tilted unnaturally as he stared directly at their window. They froze, too shocked to even record the live feed. The man whispered something they couldn't hear, then turned and crossed the street. For 30 minutes, he stood there under the streetlight, his gaze never leaving their home. When police arrived, they dismissed the event, saying it wasn't illegal to stand on someone's lawn or to look at a house. Even when told of the man's bizarre behavior, they suggested the couple might be overreacting. To the couple, though, this was not overreaction, it was terror. Soon after, masked men returned, this time shining flashlights into their windows in the dead of night. One carried what looked like a crowbar. The same man who had tormented them before now escalated into a direct threat. Why them? Why this house? Each day became unbearable, with the man shouting, pointing, or simply staring blankly at them across the street. The police continued to downplay their fear, leaving them alone with their horror. Even with cameras recording, even with evidence, the harassment continues. For this couple, the dream of a safe home has crumbled into constant dread. Their once perfect sanctuary transformed into a prison of fear. Breaking free from a toxic relationship often feels like surviving a storm. You tell yourself it is over, that the worst is past, and that you can finally breathe again. For one woman, however, her freedom marked the beginning of something much darker. It was not fists or physical violence she had escaped, but something far more insidious. A psychological haunting orchestrated not by a ghost, but by the living. Her ex, Caleb, had never hit her. That made it harder for her to justify leaving at first. But his control seeped into every corner of her life. He monitored when she was online, demanded explanations for even the smallest details of her day, and gaslit her into questioning her own memory. He never screamed, never raised a hand, but his manipulation was constant and suffocating. After nearly 2 years, she finally walked away. She changed her number, deleted her social media, moved into a new apartment, and told herself she was free. For a while, she believed it. Then the barista smiled at her. It was a small coffee shop, the kind where you expect warm smiles and friendly chatter. Instead, the girl behind the counter tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." The words stopped her cold. Caleb had called her that nickname not affectionately, but sarcastically, especially when she was upset. It was his way of mocking her pain. To hear it now, from the lips of a stranger, felt like being stabbed by a memory. She brushed it off as coincidence, but coincidences multiplied. A rideshare driver glanced at her through the mirror and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" The exact words Caleb had once whispered to her during an argument. Another stranger in a grocery store brushed past her and hissed, "You don't get to just disappear." At first she wondered if her paranoia was making connections that weren't there, but then it happened again and again. Strangers repeating Caleb's phrases with unnerving precision. It wasn't only the words. Their eyes, no matter the face, carried the same expression. A man humming Caleb's favorite song as she passed him. A woman commenting on her hairstyle exactly the way Caleb used to. Different faces, same stare, same weight of familiarity, pressing into her skin. It was as though Caleb had scattered fragments of himself into the world around her. She convinced herself Caleb must be orchestrating it. Maybe he had hired a private investigator, someone feeding details to these strangers. Desperate, she reached out to his sister and begged her to make him stop. The reply came quickly. Caleb had been in rehab for 6 weeks. No phone, no contact with the outside world. Skeptical, she stalked his sister's social media only to find a recent photo of Caleb, pale and hollow, holding a one-day sober chip. So if it wasn't him directly, then who? And why? She began to feel hunted. Walking home late one night, she passed a man sitting on the steps of a building. Hood up, head down. As she approached, she spoke without looking at her. "Cold out tonight, huh? Sunshine?" Her stomach dropped. She hurried past without a word, locked every bolt when she got home, and sat frozen on her couch until dawn. The next morning, her doormat was flipped over. On the underside, scribbled in messy pen, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." She vomited. The invasion was not only in public anymore, it had entered her home. Hoping to escape, she booked a hotel, choosing anonymity over comfort. But at 2 a.m., a knock came at her door. 3 slow knocks. When she peeked through the peephole, a blank-faced woman stood there, staring at nothing, expressionless. She never spoke, never moved, until she finally walked away. The hotel staff insisted no one should have been on that floor, and all the rooms were empty. Panic turned into obsession. She remembered Caleb once talking about an online forum where people shared tactics. At the time, she thought it was self-help nonsense.
I don't think so.
Now, she realized it may have been something far more sinister. Maybe he didn't need to stalk her directly. Maybe he'd fed her life, her quirks, her secrets into an underground network. A network of strangers who could carry him forward, who could keep her tethered to his shadow. It wasn't about watching Hera, it was about making sure she was always watching for him. She dyed her hair, moved again, wiped herself from social media once more. For a brief moment, she felt hidden, but the illusion shattered when a woman brushed by her on the street and whispered, still hiding behind books, sunshine. The words sliced through her fragile peace like a blade. Now, she no longer trusts faces. Every stranger could be Caleb in disguise. Every smile could be a mask. The paranoia has consumed her life, turning her world into a labyrinth of shadows. Whether it is a cult-like service, a twisted game played by faceless strangers, or Caleb's last grasp at control, she cannot escape the haunting. Because the most terrifying part is not knowing who is watching, or when the next familiar phrase will remind her that she is never truly free. Family trips are supposed to be filled with laughter, bonding, and memories that last a lifetime. For one large family in Michigan, their long-awaited getaway to a lakeside Airbnb was meant to be just that. Instead, what unfolded over 2 nights became a nightmare that still lingers in their minds, raising questions no one can answer. The plan seemed perfect. 18 relatives under one roof, a sprawling house that faced one of Michigan's Great Lakes, and the promise of relaxation by the water. The view stretched endlessly like an ocean, waves rolling against the shore, the horizon blending into the sky. Everyone felt lucky to have found such a large and affordable property. Because the family was so big, some of the younger cousins were assigned to sleep in a secondary building, behind the main house, a 2-story garage, converted into bedrooms. It wasn't ideal. The garage was neglected, smelling of mildew with old carpeting even in the bathroom, stained bedding, and a flimsy latch on the door. Still, spirits were high, and the cousins joked about roughing it while the rest of the family enjoyed the comforts of the main house. The first day was everything they'd hoped for. Hot tubs, splashing in the lake, the chatter of cousins catching up. The sun dipped below the water in shades of pink and orange, and for a brief moment, it was exactly the memory-making trip they had envisioned. But night changed everything. When the cousins finally settled into the garage, unease crept in. The place felt wrong. One cousin mentioned a gut feeling and intuition that something bad was coming. They brushed it off as nerves until the first loud bang hit. It came around 3 a.m. So loud it rattled the garage door like something massive had thrown itself against it. The others slept through it, but the cousin lying awake knew it was not the wind.
Hurry up.
No storm, no branch could shake the building that way. Minutes later, it happened again. The crash was deafening, and the garage trembled. The third time, 2 cousins bolted upright, fear etched on their faces. Something was out there. Desperate for reassurance, they texted their aunt in the main house. She woke her husband, who stepped outside with other male relatives. They searched the property, flashlights cutting through the dark. That's when he saw it. A man standing behind the garage, not hiding, not moving, simply watching. When the uncle called out, "Hey!" the figure did not flinch. He didn't run or stumble away. Instead, he turned and vanished into the night. Not into the woods, not down the road, just gone. No crunch of leaves, no sound of footsteps. The ground was damp enough to leave tracks, yet only the uncle's footprints were visible. When the cousins were ushered back into the main house, shaken but safe for the moment, the rest of the family crowded the living room. The story spilled out in pieces, the booming crashes, the silent figure, and then a chilling discovery. 2 playing cards had been found. Both were jesters, but not cheerful ones. One was grotesque, with a twisted, demonic smile. Someone had placed them deliberately, one in the garage, one in the house. Jesters are symbols of mockery. And the hour was 3 a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It felt like they were being taunted, like the figure outside was laughing at them without sound. No one slept that night. The second night, some tried to convince themselves it was over, that maybe it was just a disturbed neighbor, someone angry about the Airbnb being rented out. But the sense of dread only grew heavier. Around 4 a.m., the mother of the cousin who had first sensed danger awoke on a couch by the big front windows. She lay frozen as she heard footsteps pacing the porch outside, slow, deliberate, each step heavy on the wood. She dared not open her eyes, terrified she would see a face pressed against the glass. Then came the rattling of the basement door. Someone was testing the lock. And downstairs, her sons and nephews slept unaware, just a thin wooden door between them and the intruder. By the time she summoned the courage to move, the sound was gone. The boys were safe, but the family knew then this was no prank. Someone or something wanted in. The following morning they packed. The trip was supposed to last until Tuesday, but by Monday they were gone, leaving the lake behind with unanswered questions. On the drive home, theories swirled. Some thought it was a local, angry about outsiders invading their quiet stretch of shoreline. Others were convinced it was paranormal, pointing to the vanishing figure and the eerie gesture cards as evidence of something not human. Even stranger, when they contacted the Airbnb host, she promised to review footage from a camera mounted above the garage. They never heard back. Calls and messages were ignored. Did she know more than she admitted? Was the figure someone she recognized? Someone tied to the property? Adding to their unease was a detail from their first day. 2 relatives had walked the beach and passed a woman outside the neighboring house. She didn't greet them, didn't smile, only stared with an expression that was more hostile than curious. At the time, they thought little of it. Now, in hindsight, it felt like a warning. To this day, no one in that family has an answer. But none of them will forget the pounding on the garage, the figure who refused to run, and the gesture cards left behind, like calling cards from something mocking them. What was meant to be a memory of joy became instead a story whispered in fear. And the worst part? None of them are sure if it will ever truly be over. Fear takes many forms. Sometimes it is the shadow of a masked man at your window. Sometimes it is the echo of words whispered by strangers who should not know your secrets. And sometimes it is the figure in the night who stares, taunts, and vanishes as if you were never there. For the victims in these stories, the most terrifying part was not knowing whether they were facing human cruelty or something far more unexplainable. Take the couple who thought they had moved into their dream home. What began as small trespasses, neighbors cutting through an abandoned property quickly, became something more sinister. The faceless stare from the window, the stolen doorbell camera, the masked figure standing like a crucifix in the yard. These were not random acts. They were calculated demonstrations of power, designed to break down the couple's sense of safety. It is easy to say, call the police. But what happens when the police arrive, shrug, and tell you nothing illegal has occurred? That indifference becomes another layer of terror. It tells you that you are on your own, that even the systems meant to protect you will not help. Then there is the young woman haunted by the words of her ex. Caleb didn't need to follow her anymore. His control lived on through the mouths of strangers. Whether he had orchestrated it through some underground service, or whether she had stumbled into something larger and more disturbing, the effect was the same. She could not trust anyone. Every smile, every passing remark could be a message from him, even when he was locked away in rehab. Imagine never knowing if the person behind you on the street is just another passerby or a vessel for someone else's obsession. That kind of fear is not confined to the night. It eats at every waking moment, turning the world itself into a trap. And then, the family who wanted nothing more than a week of joy by the lake. They came with coolers of food, games, and hopes of laughter. Instead, they were given pounding crashes at the devil's hour, a man who stood without moving and then disappeared without a trace, and playing cards with twisted gestures, left like mocking trophies. Even the strongest, most logical among them, the uncle who confronted the figure, could not explain what he saw. The silence of the Airbnb host, the cold stare of the neighbor, and the unanswered question of who or what was on that property left the family rattled long after they drove away. When you step back, the similarities become impossible to ignore. All 3 stories begin with ordinary people in ordinary places. A new home, a fresh start, a family vacation, places that should be safe. And yet, safety crumbled. Each time, there was a progression. Small disturbances growing into undeniable threats. The victims all turned to authorities or rational explanations, only to be dismissed or left without answers. And in each case, the true source of the terror remained unknown. That is what makes these stories so chilling. If it were clearly a ghost, you could convince yourself it was only superstition.
Come on, let's go. We don't have
If it were clearly a stalker, you could fight back, file charges, move again. But when it is blurred, when the figure disappears into thin air, when the police tell you nothing illegal has happened, when strangers smile at you with the voice of your abuser, you are left in limbo. The human mind craves explanation, but sometimes the explanation never comes. That limbo itself becomes the prison. The victims in these stories share another common thread: isolation. They tried to speak, to report, to seek help. Each time, their fears were minimized. You're overreacting. It's probably the wind. It isn't illegal to look at a house. Those dismissals strip away more than just comfort. They erode your trust in others, leaving you trapped with only your fear for company. So what do we take from this? That monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they stand across the street, staring with arms spread wide. Sometimes they smile behind the face of a stranger at a coffee shop. Sometimes they pound against your door at 3 a.m. to remind you that safety is an illusion. The scariest part is not the figure, the phrase, or the gesture card. It's the uncertainty. Are you being haunted or hunted? Is it something paranormal, or simply human malice taken to its most deranged extremes? The truth is, it doesn't matter, because fear lives not only in what is real, but in what might be real. And when the line between the two disappears, so does your peace of mind. This is the price they paid, to live with the knowledge that once the darkness finds you, it may never let you go. Horror is not only about what lurks in the shadows. Sometimes it is about what stares at you openly, what whispers from the mouths of strangers, and what knocks on your door when the world is asleep. These 3 stories show us how fragile the illusion of safety truly is. The young couple who bought their dream home discovered that the most terrifying thing was not a haunted house, but real people who used intimidation, trespassing, and masks to steal their peace of mind. The woman who tried to escape her toxic ex learned that control can survive separation, that even strangers on the street can become carriers of someone else's obsession. And the family on vacation saw firsthand how joy can turn to dread when the night itself seems to mock you with sounds, figures, and unexplained symbols. The lessons here are not easy, but they are clear. First, evil does not always hide. Sometimes it shows itself plainly, daring you to dismiss it. Never ignore those first signs. A stare that lingers too long, a knock at an odd hour, a stranger repeating words that only someone close to you should know. These are not coincidences. They are warnings. Second, trust your instincts. Every victim in these stories felt uneasy before the worst moments occurred. Intuition is not paranoia. It is survival. If something feels wrong, act on it. Leave, lock your doors, document what you can. Fear may sometimes embarrass you, but it can also save your life. Third, understand that help is not always guaranteed. Authorities may dismiss you, friends may downplay your fears. That does not make them any less real. Your responsibility is to take your safety seriously, even when others do not. Keep evidence, install cameras, and make noise about what is happening. The more documented and undeniable the threat becomes, the harder it is for others to ignore. Finally, remember that darkness feeds on silence. Abusers, stalkers, and even whatever unexplained forces might exist thrive when their victims are isolated and unheard. Share your story, reach out, refuse to be quiet. Even if no one can explain it, naming your fear keeps it from owning you completely. These stories remind us that safety is not a permanent state, it is something you must defend. Sometimes against forces you cannot fully see or understand. Whether the threat is human or something beyond, the cost of ignoring it can be devastating. And so, when the knocking comes, when the voice calls you sunshine from a stranger's lips, when a masked figure spreads his arms in your yard, ask yourself, will you pretend it is nothing, or will you face the darkness head on? Because these are not just stories, they are warnings, and they are the price others have already paid. So if you dare to step deeper into the shadows to hear more true accounts of terror and survival, subscribe now to The Price Paid. Your next nightmare begins here.